I have not done anything, and I think Joel explained to us exactly what we're going to cover. But and again, if anyone has any added information or things you want to look at, but we're going to work our way through this one day at a time, and hope we can. Yesterday was a hard day, but every day it'll probably be a little easier. The hardest part is getting all your numbers and your codes, and I would hope we could keep the same codes, but I don't think that's going to happen. That's the troubling part I find at this point. But with that, let's turn it over to Secretary Flynn. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Chair Mazza, and it's good to see you, Senators. Welcome to the new Senators. For the record, my name is Joe Flynn, Secretary of the Agency of Transportation, and I would ask my team with me here today, the Commissioner and the three Directors, perhaps if they would introduce themselves and just the area that they oversee. Perhaps we could start with Commissioner Manoli.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And it's great to be back. I look forward to working with the Senate Transportation Committee. I am the Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles, and I've been with the department since 2017 and appointed in 2018. And for the record, we have been working closely with your legislative staff on a draft DMV miscellaneous bill that you'll have an opportunity to talk about shortly, I'm sure.
Thank you, Juan. If we could go to Highway, please.
Good morning, everyone. For the record, my name is Wayne Simmons, and I'm the Chief of Highway Division. And I have been with the agency now for about 28 years, and in this position for about 3.5. My division pretty much covers everything that's related to highways at the Agency of Transportation, and look forward to connecting with all of you and working with the new senators.
Thank you. If we could move now to Finance and Administration.
Good morning. My name is Wayne Gamble. I'm the Director for Finance and Administration. I'm actually coming up on my 39th year, and the last 4 years has been with my current role. In F&A, we do everything customer service based, basically. That's internal customers and external customers. So, and I believe our team will be in Friday morning to go over what F&A does.
Thank you. And certainly not last or not least, policy planning and intermodal development.
Good morning, Senators. I'm Michelle Boomhauer, and I'm the Division Director for Policy Planning and Intermodal Development, which includes our public transit, rail, aviation, policy planning, research, mapping, permitting groups. And I've been with the agency, I'm at the start of my 6th year. And prior to that, I spent over 20 years working in regional planning in Lamoille County and Chittenden County. Thank you.
I just want to add just a moment. These folks they're available to any of us, and they'll anytime you have any questions. That's what's nice about this crew. They've been there a long time, and boy, if you got a question you can't answer for a constituent, give them a call and they will take care of it, or give them a reply anyway. So that's what I'm so proud of, because we have a terrific staff at the agency, and this is just a sample of many of the folks over there who are so helpful on any issue that you might have. Thank you. Go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
No, thank you. And for the record, for the new members, I started at VTrans actually in 2009 in the Douglas administration. In early Shumlin administration, I moved to the Department of Public Safety in various roles, and then came to the Agency of Transportation with Governor Scott. So I've been in state service since 2009. And with that, I am now going to attempt to seamlessly share my screen for the first time. After much help today from Liz and Michelle. And can everybody see that okay? Whoops. Are you seeing my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay, great. Obviously, so this is the performance and highlights for calendar 2020. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about our 22 budget. This is the macro org chart of the organization, and we'll get a little bit deeper into each one of the divisions as the presentation evolves, along with contact information for those of us here on the screen. And I believe Michelle also has a more detailed contact list that we can provide you for more of our managers in the agency. Let's see here. Just quickly to talk about our mission and areas of priority. It really is about safety first and foremost, excellent customer service, and the efficient movement of people and goods. It is obviously what we do. Priorities that we look through every lens at most of all the things that we are involved with, our decisions, our policies, and our projects are aimed to grow the economy, make Vermont more affordable, protect its vulnerable, and continuous modernization and improving the efficiencies of our agency as part of the whole of government. Some strategic plans and highlights, clearly our people, attracting, developing, and retaining talented people, providing employees with ongoing inclusion, civility training. We have new employee welcomes. We do probably every 6 weeks, depending upon the number of new employees that have entered the organization. We're an organization of right about 1,258, 59 people as of a week or so ago. That's somewhat always in flux, of course, with retirements or people moving to other agencies or just taking other jobs. But people development, professional development is something that is very, very high on our radar at the Agency of Transportation. Also, a big focus on transitioning to energy efficient and advanced technology as we look across our transportation systems. An example of that is 3 years ago, we set a strategic priority of having a level 3 fast charger for electric vehicles within 30 miles of every Vermonter where they reside. And that effort will be completed in this calendar year. And also, we'll speak more about this in the presentation, but looking ahead to the framework of the possibility of autonomous vehicles, autonomous vehicle testing in Vermont, information technology systems as they relate to transportation, intelligent transportation, much more to talk about in this presentation and then in following days from our agency staff. But it's a very exciting and evolving time as it is across all of business today. Some strategic plan highlights. Clearly, our mission is to provide a safe, reliable, and efficient transportation system, as I said. We are updating the transportation project selection and prioritization system. This is really how do projects get in the order they get in? How do they get in the book? How do they get built? We've been in the same current posture for about 10 years, which is vastly improved from the way it used to be years and years and years ago. Which really were more, who had influence perhaps on getting a project done. Today, through asset management and prioritization, and we'll speak about asset management a little further on here this morning, but we try to do the right thing at the right place at the right time. And obviously there's discussion about that, but so updating that system and the way that we do make those decisions is currently ongoing. We have a continuous focus on safety. Reducing the number of major crashes that occur in Vermont beyond just what we all, unfortunately, every year see the statistics on fatal crashes, but just crashes in general. And then continuing to work on passenger rail capacity. We'll speak more about that. We'll speak about Amtrak. We'll speak about the current suspension of Amtrak due to the COVID pandemic. However, prior to that, we were increasing passenger rail capacity. We are still building for that along the Western Corridor, and we'll talk about that a little more this morning. And continuing to engage in corridor management planning with local communities. This is a very important component. We understand when our projects come through communities, they can be disruptive. They can create traffic delays. They can create all sorts of tangential effects, if you will, on a community. We continue, we believe, to be actively engaged both before the projects come and then while they are ongoing, and to continue to increase and improve how we do that across Vermont. And making Vermont more affordable and serving the vulnerable by providing access to convenient and affordable travel choices. We'll talk a lot about public transit this morning. automatic vehicle location, apps where people can see where their bus might be, and even some on-demand trip planners you may have seen recently in the news. A project like that has just been rolled out in the Montpelier area. So it's more like you call and the ride comes, as opposed to waiting for fixed routes. So these are all very forward-leaning and exciting projects that we have. Just in continuing a bit here, as far as modernization and improving efficiency through innovation and continuous improvement, we're always looking for ways to reduce the time, the cost of planning and engineering and permitting, right-of-way acquisition and construction management. Some of this, of course, is not solely dictated by us when it comes to right-of-way acquisition. These are really real estate transactions that need to occur between us and private landowners. And sometimes those have their own timelines, and we have to work within what those timelines are and how our the other parties perhaps want to engage. So there's some degree of lack of control of some of that process, but what we can control, we're constantly looking to improve so that we can be more efficient and more timely and do so at a lower cost. We are completing a process to improve the overweight, oversized permit system, which I will speak more about today, and then I know Commissioner Manoli's team will as well. This is where the commercial trucking industry reaches out to us because they need to move a load that is either over height, over width, or overweight from what is typically legally permitted to move on the highways. This will be a system that really they can apply online, they can pay online, and it should streamline the time and expense for everyone involved. And also develop an online permit application system for work in the right-of-way. So along the state roads where we own the edges and the right-of-way, anything that occurs in that area has to be permitted, whether it's a driveway for a residence, entrance, or exits for businesses or anything of that nature. So these are 1111 permits. They're issued through Michelle's shop and policy planning and intermodal development. And we're working to streamline that experience as well for our customers. Moving into some of the divisions now, this is a little deeper dive into Wayne Simmons' area of the Highway Division. And all these folks will be in to testify at one point or another, but within Highway, if you look on the left side of the lower portion of the chart, we have the Construction and Materials Bureau, the Maintenance Bureau, which really are our district garages and the orange fleet that you typically see. We have Central Garage that keeps all the equipment moving. We have Operations and Safety Bureau, and then on the right side, Project Delivery and Asset Management and Emergency Management. We'll talk all about these portions of this a little further here. Looking at highway safety, in 2020, we finished the year, sadly, with 62 fatalities and 58 fatal crashes. If you look at this in the context of simply comparing it to 2019, it's a dramatic and alarming increase.
Construction and Materials Bureau.
What I would say is looking at this across the last 5 or 6 years, 2020 actually was the third lowest year in the last 6 years. 2019 was an anomaly. We don't really understand the reason why. We've spoken to our counterparts in New England. We've even spoken to our counterparts in Quebec. And 2020 was down both in fatal crashes and fatalities across the entire region. And no one really seems to have an exact answer for why. But nonetheless, 62 is 62 too many. We continually work to do everything we can possibly do to lower those numbers. And this slide shows the data. We get this data weekly, and what you have before you is the unofficial 2020 recap. I say unofficial because these numbers typically aren't official until some point in mid-February or so, because there may still be investigations ongoing now in regards to some of the later crashes in 2020. And there also is toxicology information that yet hasn't been received from the Department of Health Laboratories, which could speak to whether or not more or less drivers were influenced or impaired. But the data at this point shows, frankly, a continuing alarming rate, in my opinion. 57% of all fatalities involved people who were unbelted, quite frankly. They were not using seat belts that were available to them in a vehicle. And equally alarmingly, 47% of drivers involved in fatal crashes were either impaired by alcohol, impaired by drugs, or impaired by both alcohol and drugs. So we continue to have an impairment problem in Vermont when it comes to driving. And clearly, many people who choose not to wear seatbelts and choose not to follow the law that are currently on the books. Moving into some performance measures, this slide is intended to show you the landscape as it relates to the bridge system in the state of Vermont. On the left, you have interstate bridges, in the center, state highway bridges, and on the right, town highway bridges. This is a metric that we hope shows the effort from the commitment of people, power, and money, in part that you have supported us in through our programs and through our budgets. And it shows how we've driven down the deficient rating, if you will, for our structures in the state of Vermont. I want to point out, deficiency does not mean safety. If we deem a bridge to be unsafe, we immediately take action through an emergency order, which I'm allowed to sign as secretary, to close a bridge. And we've done that a few times since I've been secretary, and certainly others have as well. This is more a metric, and Wayne Simmons' shop and their folks will talk more about this in following days, but this is a metric that refers to condition, and it measures many things within the structure of the bridge. The story that this graph is hopefully showing by the declining numbers as you look from left to right is through the effort and investment of the agency. We have lowered significantly the numbers of deficient bridges. And currently 2% are structurally deficient across our interstate system, 4% across the state highway system, and 2% across the town highway system. We also measure pavement in the same way, intending to show how does our effort and the investment in that effort reflect in what's the experience, if you will, on the roadway. Probably this is a busy chart. The best way that I can describe to look at this chart is if you look at the lower colors, the lighter shade of purple and the darker shade of purple, these reflect poor and very poor pavement rating conditions. And if you go from left to right, so from 2010 to 2020, you see those shades of purple getting smaller. And conversely, if you look at the two shades of green from left to right, you see those getting larger. And so what that means is that the way that pavement performance is measured is it's improving, and we're reducing poor and very poor condition pavement. A couple of notes. I like to say that that's fine, but if a person lives in an area where the condition is poor or very poor, then that's 100% of their experience all the time, and we understand that, and we don't fail to realize that. But this is a statewide snapshot, and we believe that it's warranted to show that with the investments in the T fund and the projects that we push forward, we are making a difference in pavement condition, and we know that we still have much to do. There's also a note, there's an anomaly in 2020. We have specialized equipment that measures this, and we had an equipment breakdown, so not all of the 2020 data is yet been captured or baked into that one column. So the last full year was 2019, and at that point, 70% of the pavement was good or fair, and 30% of the pavement was poor or very poor. And so the numbers at this point aren't complete, but we're tracking at 62% for 2020, and that will change, of course, when all that data is consumed. I spoke earlier about asset management. This plays a big role in determining what we do, when we do it, and where do we do it. And this is an effort, really, the agency, I believe it's probably been at least 10 years. It's been identifying and understanding where all the things are that it has across the network. And literally by that, I mean, you know, culverts and signs. Bridges are pretty easy, obviously, but we own so much, and understanding where everything is so that you can assess its condition, and then you can determine from that assessment, when does it need to be replaced and how does it stack up against other equal structures or things that need to be replaced as well, knowing we can't do everything at once. So this helps us with our prioritization process that I described earlier. And it also measures things like bridge conditions and pavement conditions over a 5-year running average. It's been a very significant effort. And as you can imagine, these are real numbers, 49,465 culverts. You know, these things get built over decades and decades and decades. And there are people who have long since retired who put in a lot of these, and you know, new people today may not know where everything is until all of a sudden there's a problem with one, and then you know where it is. So this is an effort to have identified that, along with all the signs in our right-of-way around Vermont. And so it's a big deal. It's been a lot of work. It's a very good program. It's frankly fairly cutting edge. The fellow that played an instrumental role in this retired late in 2020. And Chad Allen, you may remember him. He's been in many times. He's moved to the state of Washington to take what he knows about how Vermont has led the way with asset management, and he's working on this type of project in the state of Washington. So Vermont's really been very forward-leaning in its asset management process. This slide shows you, it's a report card really on how we've done with project delivery. One of the areas that we focused heavily on when we arrived was getting contracts and getting projects out the door in a more timely fashion for many reasons. Primarily, if a project is worth doing, it's worth doing and it's worth getting to it. It's also more helpful to our industry partners in construction to get these projects bid sooner so that they can start planning for the materials and the personnel that they're going to need to help us to get these projects completed for the sake of Vermont. So we've worked hard to do that. What happens is in January of every year, we produce a forecast or a snapshot of what we expect to put out for projects and when we expect to put them out in this current year. Excuse me. 78 projects were advertised in 2020, and 66% of those were advertised on time. 34% were advertised on time or ahead of schedule. And there were delayed projects, and we've tried to show at the bottom of the page the reasons for some of those delays. There's always organic and fluid movements on anything. Sometimes delays are deliberately done by us for various reasons. Something else might pop up as an emergency. We need to move something. There could be a last minute funding change, and we'll discuss COVID and the financial impacts at a high level later in the presentation, and then more deeply, of course, at the budget presentation in 2 weeks. But so sometimes there's some change there, but a lot of them are either tied up in right-of-way, as I said before. Some are tied up in court. We have the Exit 16 project in Colchester, which is tied up in court. It's been ongoing for a couple of years like that as well now. So there are many reasons, and sometimes there are doing. But the point is that this group, both the design and engineering team that put projects together, and the contract and administration team and legal team that then literally build that contract and put it out to bid, have done a tremendous job in improving the delivery rate and the timeliness of this. And this, it's one of these things that doesn't perhaps make a lot of people's radar screens, but it really matters in how we get things done. And so we wanted to just talk about that and show you that. We'll talk a few minutes about some of the major highlights of projects that are either completed or underway still here in Vermont. This is the Waterbury Main Street, if you're familiar with the area. It is a complete and total reconstruction of US Route 2, which is Main Street in Waterbury, including sidewalks and curbing, street lighting, utility relocation, drainage and signals, and obviously new pavement. This project is completed or will be completed this year. And when you look at Waterbury, once that is done, you look at the new roundabout and the work done at the Interstate 89 bridges, Waterbury's infrastructure should be in Stowe Street as well. So Waterbury will be really in great shape for a long time to come. And they've been a great partner on this project. It's certainly one of these I talked about a while ago, corridor management. It's certainly disruptive in the center of a downtown, but the village and the people of Waterbury, and have a lot to be proud of when this is, as it nears completion. This is a project that's occurring in Pittsford. You may be familiar with the project that we just completed in Brandon, and this is the continuation of the upgrade of US Route 7. This is a widening project, rehabilitation in full depth in Pittsford. And this project is scheduled to be completed in this calendar year of 2021 as well. This project occurred in Heinsberg, if you're familiar with the Four Corner intersection out near Champlain Valley Union High School. Major traffic intersection, very increasing volume of traffic in that neighborhood and in that part of Vermont. And this will be completed in 2021 as well. And again, we're looking at widening projects. There's some turn lanes there, new signaling, very good project for that local community. Stowe Morrisville, we started Route 100 a few years back in Waterbury. We did Waterbury to Stowe, and this project now has taken from Stowe up to Morrisville along Route 100. It's done different things with grading and corners, and there's some intersections up there that have been improved, and a lot of work was done at night, as was the first segment. We worked very closely with Stowe. Again, I talk about community outreach. There was a lot of concern early on about, the schedule was going to have this project paving at night in a lot of places right in Stowe Village. There was some concerns about pre-pandemic. There were concerns about the impacts that would have on some of the inns and restaurants, and the highway team to work with the paving contractor, work with the community, and we felt that we really worked around some of those concerns very effectively. Again, so this it's a good project. Let's see, did I skip? Okay, sorry about that. This is I-91. This is over the Williams River in Rockingham, two massive structures that will be completed this year. Wayne's team can speak more to the details, but these are among the tallest bridges, if I'm not mistaken, on our entire roadway system. So the logistics of these projects, of this particular project, were immense. These massive concrete linear pieces were all produced in Middlebury, and they were all trucked up Route 7 and across 89 and down 91. So this very, very big project as well, as I say, very complicated. It's been ongoing now for over 2 years and should be finished this year. This is Middlebury, a project that is not yet completely done, but it is mostly done. This is clearly a showcase project, and it's a project that showcases how a community has embraced something. Our projects can be very disruptive, and we know that. This one is clearly at the top of that list, perhaps. Yet Middlebury embraced the reality of how this project was going to unfold, worked with us and worked with the contractor tremendously to make the best of the impacts of construction on the community, and is going to have a showcase downtown when this is done. This project effectively built a tunnel through the center of town where there was previously just an open cut, subterranean open cut for the railroad. That open cut actually acted as a gutter, as a drainage ditch for all the water in the park in Middlebury from the green all the way down. It was not a great situation at all, certainly not a great situation for operating a railroad. That has been improved. The drainage has been dealt with through a series of shafts that were bored underneath the Middlebury Green to collect water. And direct it to the Otter Creek in an appropriate fashion as opposed to the way that it was previously ending up there. And it also put the train underground through the center of town and creates new park, sidewalk, and green space at the surface, which didn't exist before. The project also required a 10-week period this past summer in 2020, where work occurred 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, did not stop in the center of town. Lights, heavy equipment, machinery. It really was a massive project. The people of Middlebury have so much to be proud of. And the tunnel for train traffic opened in September of last fall. The train traffic for 10 weeks had to be rerouted on a different competitive line across the G&W, which is the one that comes down through Montpelier Junction into Chittenden County. And that was a massive negotiating effort in and of itself to get two competing railroads to work together to allow us to shut down the line through Middlebury for 10 weeks. That occurred successfully. So we're very grateful to both railroads for that cooperation, to our contractor in Middlebury, and again, as I say, to the citizens of Middlebury and the Middlebury Select Board, who've been very good to work with. There will be a formal ceremony this fall on the green when all the tidying up work, if you will, has been completed. This is the drawbridge between Grand Isle and North Hero. It too is a very unique project. We have only one operating drawbridge in the state of Vermont. It had reached its useful life. Parts were no longer available for the electric motors that operated the spans. I can't tell you how many times the spans would stop working in the upright position. I live in Grand Isle County. I've experienced that personally. It's a serious safety matter as well, because when the spans were stuck in the open position, it was an awful long way around from the southern tip of North Hero to get to a hospital either in St. Albans or Burlington, because there's only one route through the islands, and that is across this drawbridge. Very unique project, as are any projects that work in water. You can imagine how that complicates construction. This project also has a temporary drawbridge that was built to the west of the Route 2 alignment. On the left-hand picture where you see the camera, just to the left of that superstructure is part of the temporary drawbridge. So we're required to maintain access for vessels by Coast Guard regulations. So effectively built the temporary drawbridge while the new bridge is under construction. This will be, there will be traffic on this bridge, but that won't occur until 2022. It's had some very unique things, as well as massive underwater concrete pours involving over 100 concrete trucks with sort of military precision over the course of 2 different days between this past December and earlier in the fall. And Wayne Simmons' team and structures can talk more in detail about this. But again, it is highly unique. And we wanted to show you some of the diversity and uniqueness of the projects that are occurring in Vermont, because unless people travel around, they might not otherwise know that. This bridge is a bridge on 104A in Georgia. It was heavily damaged in a crash a few years ago. The bridge was certainly not in pristine condition before the crash, but what occurred is it resulted in a lane closure for well over a year, actually 2 years almost. And that was very complicated. There are a lot of commuter traffic in that area that come into Chittenden County to work in the morning. And we ended up accelerating construction of a brand new bridge here. And this brand new bridge was installed in 35 days from start to finish. We do use accelerated bridge construction wherever it warrants, and the structures group can speak more about that type of program when they come before you. But it was really quite a process, and it showed, I think, the nimbleness of the agency, because this was not a project that was anticipated. It was not in the book. It was not planned, but it became an emergency because of the crash that created the damage to the bridge. So everything had to move. I spoke earlier sometimes of how some projects get pushed around or just all of a sudden appear. And this is a testament to how we adapt to having to do things that we hadn't necessarily planned on previously. This is down on I-91 in Heartland, Vermont. And really what it shows is just some innovative ideas on how to replace bridges. The picture on the left is the old bridge. The bridge structure itself spans both barrels of the interstate. You can see how wide that expanse is. But through some innovative design concepts and working with the Federal Highway Administration, the picture on the right shows you the brand new completed project, which really results in 2 bridges with an earthen berm being built in the center, which therefore relieved us from having to have that bigger span and save money, save time. And again, it just speaks to innovation. If you're driving on the road, your experience is really the same, but things cost a lot of money and they take a lot of time. And we continue to try to innovate and identify problems and think of different ways to try to solve the problems. And this is an example of that. We'll talk a bit about the Municipal Assistance Bureau. I think it's important, especially for new members, to understand that the agency is very involved at the municipal level. We'll speak about training a little bit later in the presentation, but we do an awful lot of work with your town highway people. We do a lot of training with them for free. We also assist in their local projects. We help to engineer projects if asked, and we have a lot of locally managed construction projects. The list just shows you on the top of the page what was accomplished in 2020, and the lower half of the page is what we hope to accomplish in 2021, working with municipal partners. Of note, on the lower half of the page are some sort of critical and key projects, including the Champlain Parkway in Burlington and the Crescent Connector in Essex Junction, which are both very important projects to those communities. We're also going to be working on some park and rides, expanding the park and ride in Berlin, right there by the Comfort Inn and Applebee's, and also the Northfield Williamstown expansion of a park and ride, which it currently is there right when you get off the highway and start heading down into Northfield. And we'll talk in a moment about some new park and rides as well that are coming online in this current year. This shows it's a little bit of information on the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. Fantastic project. We're very grateful for the support of the legislature. There'll be a much more in-depth presentation provided to you in the coming days on this, but there's current construction underway. 7 bridges will be advertised by midwinter, and the remaining construction will be advertised by this spring. We've bundled a lot of the work on this entire project, so contractors can bid on entire segments and not just have one contractor, for example, who might do the bridges and then somebody else who might do the work right near those bridges. We've looked at this, again, we think in an innovative way. So again, a lot more information to come on this, but we really would like to showcase and focus on the work on this project in this coming year, because it is a great story. It's a partnership. Certainly the legislature supported this with us. We're grateful for that. It connects and ties towns and counties across the top half of the state of Vermont, from, you know, sort of the middle of the state on the east to the northwest on the west. And so a very good project. We're very proud of it. Senator Kitchell, if you're speaking, I'm sorry, I think you're muted.
Yes, this is a wonderful project, but I think for new members of the committee, we ought to recognize the role that the chair played in the acquisition of this rail bed in the first place, which was many, many years ago. And in fact, at the time, there were other legislators who really questioned the wisdom and the necessity for the state to acquire this property. But I think in retrospect, we realize what a wonderful public asset the state now has and its economic potential. And so, yes, we're focusing on getting the trail finished now, but there wouldn't be any trail if the legislators at the time hadn't been willing to step up and say, it is to the state's benefit to acquire that policy. And Senator Mazza was there and led that charge. And I just think it's good to recognize the value of the trail. It's something all Vermonters own. And And now everybody is applauding its potential, but the original decision to acquire did not come without controversy. Just my 2 cents, so I'm complimenting the chair.
No, excellent point. And also you make me realize that I can't see everybody's faces. So I apologize if others were wanted to talk in. I mean, clearly just talk in, but I can't see you. So I don't want to appear rude if by chance I don't
We'll go
recognize
back
the
to
fact you're
questions
speaking.
after Joe. When you're completed, we'll go back to questions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Unless it's compliments for the chair, then we can
Yeah,
interrupt.
that's right. That's right. That's the only thing I want to hear. Right. Thank you.
All right. Okay, again, a little bit more in the municipal assistance. Talk a moment about some park and ride facilities, a new facility built in Royalton and Thetford. And then we've upgraded the facility in Cambridge and St. Johnsbury. Those efforts have added 175 spaces to the system. And we're expecting in this calendar year to go to construction on a new facility in Williamstown and a new facility in Williston. And when done, as well as the enlargement of the Berlin one I mentioned, this will add a total of 226 new spaces to our system statewide. E-construction initiative, this is just, again, another innovative thing we're taking on. We have a vision of going to completely paperless plans when it comes to construction. It's an effort that we hope to accomplish within 4 years. I remember the day of the fire at National Life in June of 2019, and Wayne Simmons and Secretary Young and Secretary Moore and I got to view the building the morning after the fire. And it was overwhelming. And you may recall, those of you on the committee, we showed you pictures of it at the time. But one of the things we realized was how much paper we print and pile when it came to plans and designs and projects. And not knowing as much as Wayne Simmons, that gave me pause and alarm when I saw it all ruined, burnt, or wet. And Wayne said, you know, it's not that frightening to me because this stuff all lives someplace electronically. And I think, I'm not sure if that was the moment or not, but it really sort of launched us in a direction to continue consciously to reduce paper and to move to electronic means of our work as much as we can, everywhere we can. I believe the NRB has gone paperless for Act 250 applications, for example, including plans. Somebody can still do it on paper if they have to, but so these are big initiatives and certainly something that we are very interested in accomplishing. And construction management system in the lower half of the page, we've talked about this before. This is the continuation of our migration away from the Ashtoware project that is no longer supported. It's really just the software system on how we organize and sort of pigeonhole our processes as related to the construction management system. There'll be more discussion, you know, from the Highway Division on that for you in upcoming days. This slide is a shot of a dashboard that talks about winter maintenance and the variables involved in winter maintenance. And it's showing you 2020 versus 2019. If you look at the top right-hand corner, one of the biggest takeaways is the reduction in salt. Of course, Mother Nature sort of determines how much effort we have to put into dealing with winter. So it isn't all just up to us on how efficient we can be or not, but we consistently work to dial our vehicles in to make sure that our calibration systems are right, that our employees follow those calibration systems. But in the end, in 2020, we saved about 68,000 tons of salt versus the year before. And of course, this has all sorts of tangential effects, not only on the environment, but on our infrastructure, on our pavement, on our steel, on our bridges and everything else. So also just draw your attention to some of the bullet points under maintenance. 13,000 acres mowed, almost 2 million miles plowed, sum total all winter long. Repair guardrail, 32,000 feet of guardrail. Almost 400 tons of litter every year. And we pick litter almost daily. We don't just pick litter at Green Up Day. We will be picking litter immediately when the snow leaves, we pick litter right up until we start plowing snow. It's a tremendous effort. It's very expensive. And it's an area that is just unfortunate that we have to spend the time and the money to continue to pick litter to the magnitude that we do. Miles of ditching and bridge washing, these are just metrics that we watch all the time. That bridge washing is part of the soup, if you will, the recipe of deficient bridges that we talked about earlier in the presentation. Mentioned a bit ago about ITS and intelligent transportation systems. If you've ever seen one of our RWIS systems alongside the highway, whether it's on I-89, you see these short towers. There's one on Route 2 by Marshfield Dam as you go up the hill heading eastbound. They're all over the state. This is an example of ITS, intelligent transportation systems. Those allow us to look at pavement. We can read temperature. We can read grip. We can actually monitor speed, not vehicle to vehicle, but we can have a sense of how fast the traffic is moving, relate that to how the grip might be dropping in the wintertime, and that gives us an indication that we need to get people out there, perhaps even in advance of when it would be obvious that we need to get people out there with some snow and ice control treatment. Other things like traffic data collection systems, speed and volume. We can determine whether vehicles are commercial or not commercial based on weight and some of the other metrics that occur when a vehicle travels by. And this also has played a role, an unintended role, in our ability to monitor traffic movement within the state of Vermont as we negotiate the response to the pandemic. These RWIS systems can aggregate volume of traffic, and we can report, and we report weekly to the governor's office and in concert with the health department. It's just one of the many pieces of data that they use to decide some of the decisions regarding the response to the pandemic. But we can sense how traffic changes, especially earlier on last spring and summer, as they started opening the spigot, as the governor says. We could see corresponding changes in volume of traffic. So really just what that showed us was that people listen and people respond, and it's very interesting. This also involves some of the newer, more modern style signals, traffic lights you see at some intersections. It appears as though there might be cameras. We're not watching anybody. What that is doing is it's organically watching the queue of traffic, and it can automatically change the sequencing of lights based on the time of day, the direction of travel based on commuters, inbound, outbound. We can change some of those ourselves manually, remotely, but some of these newer systems have the ability to do that on their own. So it's a very interesting area. And electronic message boards, you obviously have seen how we've used those around Vermont, especially during the pandemic, but we use them around Vermont very effectively long before the pandemic with other highway safety related messages. So it's an increasing area of growth for us. We look to be able to provide or to install more fixed mount message boards. Frankly, they just have so much versatility, and that's really come to show, especially during this pandemic. So, and then the data section, they produce many things, but the fatalities data that we showed you earlier, that's one area that they do. Crash data is another thing. A lot of crashes. I don't have the tip of my tongue, but I believe we run about 12,000 reportable crashes a year. So not every crash, thankfully, is ended up at a fatal crash, but many serious bodily injury crashes, property damage. And we try to work that data in any number of ways, and we feed that to law enforcement in an effort to try to come up with more effective means and tools to increase safety on the highway. So. Emergency management, this is something that we've really built out over the last several years. I mean, it's existed at the agency, certainly especially since Tropical Storm Irene. But we've consciously worked to improve our posture in this regard over the last 4 years to include a transportation management center, which isn't really shown on this slide, but our TMC is located in the Dill building across from the Knapp Airport in Berlin. Of course, it's virtual now. but it is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including in the virtual reality. And it's in constant contact with all of our garages and any of our equipment and personnel anytime they're on the road. It's also in contact with the Vermont State Police. We monitor the radio systems. We can communicate back and forth with dispatch. And as you can imagine, certainly during any crash events, we work very closely with state police or any local law enforcement for that matter, depending if the crash is on any of our U.S. Highway systems or state road systems, if there are shutdowns necessary. We operate on an incident command system that was instituted as a formality after Tropical Storm Irene by Secretary Searles at the time. Every employee must take incident command training, and we still have that posture today. And it allows us to really spin up rather quickly and rather effectively for events, whether they're just significant weather events or any type of an event. And it certainly has helped us during our portion of the response to the COVID pandemic. This shows you the makeup of Michelle's shop in policy planning and intermodal development. Really 4 areas. There's policy and research, rail and aviation, public transportation, and public outreach. And they will all be in to talk to you. Some highlights from this division, a lot of work in the space around electric vehicles and electric vehicle incentives. They work constantly with Vermont's regional planning commissions, involved with every one, and great partners for us around Vermont in that regard. They really shepherd the production of legislative studies that are mandated and that we are, due to deliver on an ongoing basis. This year, they've created, as a result of much discussion in this committee and others, they've created the automated vehicle testing permit guidance. So we wanted to know if Vermont was willing to be a landscape for any providers who wish to test automated vehicles, but we needed to have some parameters around that. And working with you, we've come up with guidelines, communicated with many municipalities, provides municipality the ability to opt out of that if they wish. It also has provided municipalities to come forward and say, we really want to welcome this. So we have none that are currently underway in Vermont, but again, there'll be some testimony, I think, to show you more details on this. A lot of work. Better connections projects across the state of Vermont are something that also emanate from this area. Resiliency planning tool, I think you might have seen a report on that last year. It's an effort that we've undertaken with Department of Environmental Conservation, Mike Klein and Joe Segali, where they do modeling. They predict flooding, and we talk about the impacts of that flooding where it's relatively known to occur, and just a lot of really interesting work there. Work on watersheds and again, the impacts that the infrastructure for transportation have on water quality. The guidance to allow temporary demonstration projects in the right-of-way, this really started as an offshoot to COVID-19. Back in the spring, as the spigot, if you will, was allowed to start opening many restaurants and other retail type operations wanted to be able to push outside of their storefronts in order to create a safer environment and follow the rules, if you will, too, of COVID, and weather permitting, allow opportunities for Vermonters to engage in what it was they did, but do so perhaps outside of the store in the right-of-way many times. You see these things called bulb outs. If you're from obviously right there on Main State Street in Montpelier, down by Capitol Grounds across the street, there's some. And so we wanted to have some guidelines because, first of all, where it is on a state highway, safety has to be the first consideration. Functionality has to be a consideration. Is it going to require maintenance? So all these things, there really need to be some guidelines and some rules about it. And so we've worked to do that, but it is very receptive to applications for people to try things in the right of way. And it's a good process. And I think you'll have more testimony on that so that you understand that. An area I think exactly that this speaks to is up near Senator Kitchell's area, right there at Joe's Pond by where the Hastings store and the other store used to be, where it's, I think, called Three Ponds Restaurant now. Back, you used to be able to drive right through there to connect to Route 15, and that's all changed now, but that's still state right of way. So there's a perfect example. While that didn't result from this, that's an example, though, of using the right of way in a different fashion than it initially was used. And it facilitates some parking and some access to that restaurant right there now, that and then forces traffic to the formal intersection. So again, this is receptive to requests to think in different ways of how we use and access the right of way. Transportation, public transportation. Last year, we were able to award 2 new e-buses, one for Lindenville area and one for the Bennington area, both with Rural Community Transit and the Green Mountain Community Network. They're money out here for up to 12 e-buses through these grant systems, and obviously studying the feasibility of this. We've been very deliberate too in trying not to just keep these buses, you know, in the high population areas. There are some certainly in Chittenden County, but we need to understand functionality across the state, including rural Vermont. And also an exciting project is occurring in Bradford on our land, on AOT land, right adjacent to the park and ride in Bradford. We're with Tri-Valley or Marble Valley Regional Transit rather, we're building a new facility, or they are building a new facility. It'll house their buses. It'll be a maintenance facility as well. So, and that's with some of the money from the VW funds. So good project for transit. I'm sorry, no, that I was right about Tri-Valley. I'm sorry, I was confusing myself. Marble Valley was awarded 2 more buses. It's Tri-Valley Transit that is building the new facility in Bradford.
Joe, before we go any further, we're going to, as promised, we're going to take a 10, 15-minute break.
Okay.
Meanwhile, there's a lot to digest, but don't worry. For the new members, we'll be going over a lot of this in detail. You're not going to get a test this morning to see, but if you have any questions before we move on to other segments of the AOT presentation, which is very good, Joe, just we'll have when we come back off a break, you can ask some questions of what you've already heard. But again, we will be revisiting a lot of these subjects again. So it's a lot to comprehend in one setting. But so at this point, unless I hear otherwise, why don't we come back on in 10 minutes and we can continue on. Okay.
Okay, great.
Great.
Thank you. All right.
Oops.
Senator Mazza or Liz, you might know the answer to this. Is this PowerPoint available to us in part of our materials packet that I should know where to find?
Let's ask Joe about that. I'm sure it is.
Liz, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Am I muted?
Liz is talking, but you're muted, Liz. I can't hear you.
Sorry. Every document that is discussed in committee is posted on our committee information page. And you should have received it in yesterday's email or today's email, I believe. Check and let me know, because I want to make sure you get all the documents every day in an email with the link to the Zoom. It'll be coming later today because whoever's sending them in today is running late. But today's,
Thanks. My apologies if I missed that.
No, that's what we're here for. Answer the questions. We want to make sure
Yeah.
you get all the information you want. Like I said, it's a lot to grab, but we'll get there.
yeah, please keep asking questions again and again. That's what I'm here for.
I found it right where I should have looked. My apologies for asking. I've got it. Thank you so much.
No apologies. Just ask whatever you need. We want to make sure you get whatever you need, and we'll. There's a lot to, like I said, there's a lot to grab onto, but we'll have many more discussions about every program again. So you don't have to grab it all this morning, but we just thought we'd have an overview.
Just getting ready for that quiz or test you mentioned.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to give a quiz to the 2 new members and see where your ratings are. You get paid according to your score.
That does not bode well for me. I'm pretty good with open book exams, so if I can access materials, I should be okay.
You do fine. It's always amazing to me how many bridges and culverts and that we're responsible for. It's just eye opening. You can't realize it. It's in the thousands and thousands, and it's just amazing how many projects that we have to we're be accountable for. That's not counting all the towns that thousands they have themselves all over the state, but it's a bigger state than we think sometimes.
I remember when Joe Flynn presented the Williston Rotary, he opened up by saying it's the one department of the state government that touches every Vermonter every day. And so,
Yeah, that's a good synopsis. That's yeah, you're right. I mean, every day someone you have there's you're on some highway or the water or something, and plowing, and people don't understand sometimes when the plow doesn't go by exactly when they want. It's just, there's so many thousands of miles, and then to make sure all the help is there. That's the other problem we've had lately is trying to get, folks that want to drive plow trucks and work the different hours. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of difficult sometimes, but they do a great job, and I'm always so proud of what they do, because if you look at the big picture, it's huge. It's very when you cover every inch of the state, it's pretty big. And when we visit these central guards, sometimes we'll see how much equipment they have that goes in and out, repairs, and it's just phenomenal. We have a program we adopted a few years ago, and every vehicle is updated. I think every 5, 6, 7 years. We try to keep the equipment up. For years they were lagging, but now they keep the equipment in tip-top shape, and but it takes a lot of equipment, plow trucks and loaders, and to do the whole state.
If Secretary Flynn would allow me, I'd love to do a ride along with a plow truck driver on one of our big storm nights.
Oh, I'm sure that they would welcome that, and it's always good to. I visit the state garages on occasion, and it's always wonderful to have those folks. They're so dedicated to their jobs. Give us an overview of what they do in their local. We have one up here in Chimney Corners, and I'm up there frequently, and what they go through, the system they go through every day, and especially in the middle of winter. And I'm so proud of the work they do, because it's a tough job, but we got some good folks. We're looking for more all the time. It's so Senator Chittenden, if you're looking for a job, we got one for you.
Yeah, get a CDL.
Yeah, that's right. You got to get CDL. That's right.
To add to your
Okay,
other,
let's get back on. If everybody's ready to go back on again. Is Joe available?
Yeah, I'm here, Senator.
Okay, I think we're ready to go back on. Are there any questions up to now that you want any information about? It would be great to, before we move on. Sure, Senator Ingalls.
Well, first, I just want to say what an amazing presentation. It's just amazing that of all the projects that you have pointed out, I know either an engineer on the project or one of the contractors on there. And very, very amazing presentation. I have a lot of questions, but the only one I just want to get out of my brain right now, the interstate, is that something the state of Vermont owns? It's not federally owned where we manage the interstate. It's a Vermont owned entity, the interstate program or project.
It's owned. I mean, it's part of the National Highway System. It's a part of the federal network, but we own it. I'm not sure if we have title to it, but yeah, we own it. We control it. We determine projects. We determine paving projects, for example. Obviously, that's all shared federal money, and we'll talk a lot about that when we go through the budget. But most of the money, frankly, is federal money. I would just ask Wayne Simmons. I just want to make sure I don't misspeak on this with respect to ownership per se of the federal highway system.
I think you stated it right. It is a state of Vermont asset, but because it was constructed with federal funds and it's a limited access highway, FHWA has oversight on certain uses, and there are certain restrictions in terms of access points. But FHWA is nationally looking at some of those, and I think over my career, certainly that oversight has felt a lot less ominous, and I think states are starting to have more ability to have the interstates feel more or follow along more closely with what states' wishes were than what FHWA's wishes were once when it was built.
Thank you.
One of the things I get asked occasionally is at our rest areas, why don't we sell product or anything? Well, that's one of the restrictions the federal government has, and it's a good one, I think, that we can't sell. We can't commercialize those rest areas. even if we wanted to, which we don't. I think we want people to get up and help the local economy. But there are things that you can't do, and that's fine. I think they have a good like signage that's pretty well controlled by what can go up and what can't go up. But all in all, I think it's some good policy there.
And I might just inject too that the reason you see some places that do have commercial or retail enterprise, like along the New York State Thruway, for example, is that they did not use federal funds to build out their entire network. So that's why they can do that. And that's why that's right. And they have toll booths to fund their operations as well. So, and that really originated, back in the 40s and 50s as these interstate highway systems were designed and began to be constructed, and how different states approached the building of those.
I had a question.
Sure, go right ahead.
I had a question. Well, first of all, new members, a new term is MUTCD, which you will find controls a lot of the decisions. That's because towns will approach us about wanting to reduce speed limits or add signage or whatever. So the manual on uniform traffic devices is you'll hear reference to that. So just, I'd never heard of it until I got on transportation. But my question, Joe, you talked about the Bradford, the Tri-Valley Transit and using the park and ride. I had heard that staff are trying to explore sort of the subdivision issue with other land that that parcel came from. Did that get resolved? And maybe that's a question for Michelle.
Yeah, I'm not aware, Senator, but I'm sure Michelle probably has the most up-to-date data. I know that there was a groundbreaking ceremony about a month ago, and I thought that certainly the project was moving forward. But Michelle, any input on that?
Yes, Senator Kitchell. We actually have been actively working with the transit provider on subdividing the property. Actually, no, excuse me, on leasing the property to the transit agency. We're not doing it through a subdivision at this point.
Okay. All right. Just wanted an update because part of the land is contiguous with the Margaret Pratt community. And we were asked, of which I'm on the board, and we were asked about subdivision approvals and so forth that occurred in the past. So, and it was related to the siting of the transit at the park and ride. So thank you.
Yes.
Sure, Maz, I have one comment.
Senator Jim.
So I just want to make one comment, and it's sort of a question, but not to be answered today. I'm intrigued by the intelligent transportation systems. I didn't know we were 45% of our network has been upgraded. I'd love to know more about this, but not necessarily today. I'm curious how you're tracking congestion, be it by site, Bluetooth, cellular, or if you're transmitting out where the congestion is. But that's of great interest to me. If there's information or readings that you would direct me to, I'm very intrigued.
We will definitely talk more about that, Senator, and any of the information that we have available, we can direct you to as well.
Senator Mazza?
Yes, Senator.
Just two things since we have you here, Secretary Flynn, that I bring to your attention that I heard from constituents this year since we last spoke. One was an incident in Marshfield dealing with political signs, which we've talked a lot about in the committee in the past years. And I know, unfortunately, your agency sometimes has to deal with all these signs that people put along the road. But I was texted before the election by a constituent in Marshfield that saw a state employee in an AOT truck. There was two signs at an intersection on Route 2 in Marshfield. And they saw the employee pick one sign up that was of one party and put it in the back of the truck and leave the other one. And they were just kind of upset about it. And so they texted me. I didn't send it at the time, but I thought I would just let you know, partially because I told the constituent I would bring it up with you. I wasn't concerned that it's an ongoing thing, but I just thought I would bring it to your attention that it was reported to me. And I know the policy is not to pick them all.
If I had my way, I'd tear them all down the day they're put up. We rely on the towns to do a lot of this, and and it's not working well because I'm still seeing signs. We passed some legislation here a year or so ago that would deal with these furniture companies and everybody out sticking signs all over the place. I counted one day 43 signs, not political. They were just businesses around the Chittenden County. And we've got to get towns to enforce more of these because a lot of them are on town highways, but that doesn't answer your question. But go ahead, Joe, I'm sorry.
No, certainly. And Senator Perchlik, that would disturb me tremendously, and had that information came to me, I would have immediately asked that it get down to that garage level to find out exactly what was that person thinking of. So, we should not do that. And I certainly wouldn't tolerate that. It's a big organization. I make no excuses for it if it occurred, but it is not our policy to do that. And frankly, Senator Mazza said it right. We should be sweeping. We should be sweeping stretches of road. We should be sweeping intersections, and it should be apolitical. It's really about signage. It's not about anything else.
Because the last legislation we passed was you could do them on your own property or neighbor's property, but you ask as long as it's on their property, and the minute it touches a right of way, they're supposed to be taken down. And I know I checked with our town, they have not done it. And I would hope this next session or this session, we could do with a little more discussion about this issue, because I think it's a problem. People are upset about it, and there's thousands of these things, especially during politics. But even throughout the year, there's all kinds of signs that are put on intersections, which are very distracting. So I think we've got to look at the legislation, and maybe we got to tweak it a little bit. But I know the towns play an important role in this, and they're not doing their due diligence, I think, on it.
But I do think it is troubling because the Secretary of State and the Secretary of AOT do send out clarification to candidates around the use of political signs, and still we're seeing them plunked all along, even on limited access highways.
Right.
And it seems as though if legislators can't do everything possible to comply with the law, it becomes harder to enforce the mattress people and everyone else. So it's an ongoing problem. And this year, it seems like campaign people just go out and plunk them down anywhere they want.
Hundreds of them all over the place. It's just unbelievable. And we just got to get a handle on it, because it is so distracting. It's that one intersection up here in Colchester I saw on Route 2 here. It was, I counted one day, I think it was 30 some odd signs at that intersection, which is perfectly, and they were there for weeks, and they were there after the election even, because they don't take them down unless we take them down or someone takes them down.
Right. And it's unfair to the agency to be the one having to pick them all up, but I know that's often what you have to do. The other issue that I hear a lot about is one we can bring up with the DMV commissioners, inspections. And I think a lot of it was because of COVID. A lot of their cars were stationary, so they took them in to get inspected. They had to get the rotors ground down for $600. And like we had the issue with the emissions inspections and people not having the money to get the thing fixed so they could run their car, I heard a lot of folks had the same issue. And it seemed like, unfortunately, a lot of the inspection garages were just blaming the state. So, well, don't blame me. It's the state made it much more difficult, which I wasn't in the Senate at the time, but I know for Maz and others, we made it better. We've made the inspection system easier. So it's just maybe it's just more public education or what the inspection stations can tell the public, instead of just trying to pass the buck on to us that it was our fault.
We'll have DMV in to talk about that issue again. We'll get some updates on that, how it's working. I know there wasn't much enforcement this past few months about inspections or registrations. The police were very easy on folks because they know it was a difficult time. So I know they weren't issuing tickets, as I know, I heard about that would be in violation of inspections or registrations, but we can discuss that. Anything else from Joe at this time that what we've heard so far before we move on?
I would just add a comment to Senator Perchlik's statement that, certainly I agree. We didn't change the rules with respect to rotors, but what's happened is there's no ability to circumvent those today with the electronic process, right? So enforcement of what has always been required is sort of non-negotiable now because of the tablets, and that's removed, if you will, maybe discretion. I'm not trying to imply that stations were doing things they flat out shouldn't have done, but at times there's discretion in everything. And so perhaps there's less discretion today because it is electronic. And I agree with you. I've actually had that same instance occur in vehicles that are sitting in my driveway as well. And I do believe that there are certain circumstances perhaps where it's the state is pointed to as the catalyst for these repairs being required. And sometimes, it is because that is what the requirements are. And other times it could be borderline, but you will hear a lot more from the Department of Motor Vehicles. They work very closely with our Vermont inspection station partners. They work very closely with the auto dealers. Auto dealers were part of the group that refined inspection station requirements. In fact, over a year ago, we actually reduced the number of things that are required and moved many of the things that were required into what's called advisory. An example of that is the tire pressure sensor. They drive everybody crazy. I have one on in my car right now, and I keep filling up the tire, and I have no idea why the tire pressure sensor is showing as it is. The only saving grace is I think I have a few months to go before the car has to be inspected. And at that point, I guess it's got to get figured out. But when we started here, that would have caused the car to fail. And now what you're told is this needs to be fixed. You're being advised this needs to be fixed, but we're not failing your car for inspection because of that. So, I think, and again, the commissioner will speak to this, but they've done a tremendous job working with partners to reduce the size of the inspection manual, the complexity. They've merged commercial vehicles, motorcycles, all into one document, or trucks rather, and motorcycles and cars. So I know there are still instances where this is frustrating and is a hardship for Vermonters. And, there's been an extension program for a year at least with respect to the engine light. And there'll be a lot more conversation, of course, in this session and beyond on that topic as well. But we're very aware of that and appreciate that input.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess with that, then I would pick up right here, which really is sort of the middle of the transit piece. It just, again, talks about pilot programs and micro transit pilot launches. I think the transit industry in Vermont certainly is having an internal conversation about, and pre-COVID, let's because COVID's changed everything, but prior to COVID, is the expansion of fixed-based routes the right way to go or the best way to go, especially as we push further out into rural Vermont, versus more of these on-demand type projects. And I think that's an area that's very interesting for us to work with transit providers and partners to pilot these in more rural areas of Vermont to see how that accommodates the needs of Vermonters, because having a fixed route bus is fine if you're in an urban environment, but running empty buses around because demographics have changed isn't beneficial either. So there's an awful lot of thought that's going on in this area. I mean, we're very committed to public transit. Public transit, it's impressive at not only just moving people from A to B to go to work, but how much work our providers give to people that are going to treatment, people that are going to healthcare. It really is it's a huge program. And quite frankly, I didn't know how big it was until I got in this role. Traveled around Vermont, both with Capital for a Day and on my own, meeting with the transit providers and learning the size and the expanse of the ridership opportunities for Vermonters for various needs. So again, you'll hear a lot more from Ross McDonald and Michelle going forward in the next several days. This slide, has really got a COVID story at the end. It shows ridership was very strong actually in 2019 going into 2020, and of course everything changed. This is internal ridership. This has nothing to do with intercity buses. We'll speak a bit about that when we speak about Amtrak. But the providers are providing a very safe environment. I think these numbers just reflect the fact that many people aren't doing what they used to do. They're not traveling. They're not taking the bus to go to work, perhaps. And for a lot of reasons, the ridership is down. But it will come back as everything eventually recovers from our current situation. It may look different, and as I said, it may be comprised of different methodologies, fixed route versus micro and on demand. A little bit about the Aviation Division, which is also in policy planning and intermodal development. Of course, we own all the state airports, with the exception, obviously, of Burlington International and then private airports. These are just some highlights of some projects that are currently underway at some airports. Some big expansion going on at Morrisville, Stowe, both in taxiways and runway extension. Design and engineering is underway for a very significant expansion and lengthening to the runway at the Franklin County State Airport in Highgate. And our design and rehabilitation of the runway at the Hartness Airport in Springfield. Of note, Hartness is the second longest runway in the state of Vermont, only surpassed by Burlington International. So it's a very significant facility in Springfield. And then within the Aviation Division also is where we house our unmanned aerial systems group. We have several pilots. We have a person that sort of directs this. We use these tools significantly in the highway division. We use them for bridge inspection. We can get up underneath bridges very easily and determine major ideas immediately, and also to tell us how quickly, or to triage which bridges we need to put our actual bridge inspectors onto and start climbing to assess issues and situations. We use these for mapping. We fly our highways. We can map using LiDAR, right of way. There's a number of uses for these tools. And of course, our equipment is also available for any life safety measures, whether it's a search and rescue that would be, led by the state police or anyone else. And then there are also, one of the things that we're fairly proud of is not many agencies are officially certified to fly at night, but we have proved our proficiency to the FAA. We have a great working relationship with the FAA, and we are certified to fly at night, and that most likely would be in a life safety situation. There wouldn't be much reason that we would fly for business purposes at night. But it's again, like intelligent transportation systems, all of our tools are evolving and the technology is evolving. And this is really a very interesting area. And damage assessments, the ability to fly an area, and we did this in real world situations. We did this in the winter of 2017, I believe it was, when the Missisquoi River jammed in Swanton and flooded north for about 4 miles, burying Route 78, creating evacuations, very risky evacuations that occurred in the dark of night with Swanton Village Fire Department. They had to go down the railroad tracks to get to people. We had no way of knowing how much ice was on this stretch of road, and you just couldn't walk it. It was just a mess with chunks of ice. And we called the Grand Isle County Sheriff's Department, who I knew had UAVs in their proximity, and they came and they flew, and we got tremendous video. We had an assessment. It was so handy to have that tool available to us to be able to see what was happening out there. So again, there's many ways. I can think back during Irene how this would have been so helpful. The National Guard was helpful, but helicopters are limited and they're expensive, and these tools are very effective. So very interesting area, and you'll hear more about that. The rail program is very vast in Vermont. It's in such a good place since when I directed it in 2009, and compliments to Michelle and Dan Delabriere and Trini Broussard for where it's come since then. But we're in very good shape with grade crossings today. We have a lot of grade crossing upgrades in our program every year. We're very pleased to say that the Virginia station is complete. If you're ever out driving around, if you pull into that park and ride in Virginia, right by Cahart Crossing, that station project, that was moved up the tracks north from where it was a short distance, and it's a very good project, and it really now awaits Amtrak on its journey to Burlington. The Middlebury platform and the Burlington platform are in final design and will become under construction this year, again to facilitate Amtrak Ethan Allen into Burlington, which is scheduled for about a year from now, whether it's either the very end of 2021 or the very, very beginning of 2022. But the Middlebury Tunnel project was the really big issue that needed to be dealt with. And as I said, that is for all intent and purpose, done with, at least with respect to rail. But the platform needs to be ready. And then there's work in the Burlington rail yard as well. You may recall we were talking about where the train was going to overnight just about the time we all evacuated and went home in March, when the executive order was signed on March 13th regarding COVID. The day before, March 12th, that Thursday, we announced the decision of where the Ethan Allen would spend the night when it got into Burlington. And that was a conversation that, had a lot of injects from many quarters. And we determined that the best place to put this was in the Burlington rail yard. So there's some work ongoing now to accommodate that. There's some work ongoing now at Maple Street and King Street. And there's some realignment, a Burlington City project to move the bike path to the west side of the rail line from where it is today. So all that is in anticipation of Amtrak coming into Burlington. Returning Amtrak to Montreal is an initiative that is still on our radar very, very strongly. We remain engaged with our partners at Transport Quebec, as well as the Quebec government and the Canadian federal government to some degree. The situation really now is there needs to be final determination as to the cost of building the receiving area inside of Central Station, and what's the governing model going to look like, who's going to operate it, and that's really out of our jurisdiction. So there's some internal conversations between the City of Montreal, the province of Quebec, the federal government. Obviously, there's a degree of cost involved in that, as well as some upgrades of the actual line itself from the City of Montreal to the Vermont border. So again, for the newer members, one of the rubs here is that Amtrak in most of the country actually operates on freight rail lines owned by others. Amtrak owns very little of its own rail, and freight railroads are often not incentivized to spend money to upgrade their lines because their freight moves fine on their lines. But there are certain requirements for passenger rail that require infrastructure upgrades. And so, that then, brings the conversation of, well, if I'm Canadian National Railroad, why do I do that when I don't need to do it for my freight? Because my freight moves into St. Albans every day right now as it is. So that discussion has improved tremendously, and it's still ongoing. And we certainly hope that eventually we'll all be able to board a train. I remember doing it once from Essex Junction many years ago into Montreal, and it was a lot of fun. Great train. They've done a lot of work.
For many of us, this passenger rail has been so important. Back from Howard Dean was governor, we talked about the passenger rail from Burlington to New York City, and as you know, he was successful in getting the commuter, the silent crossings done back then, and we have been, and Senator Kitchell can jump in here. We have been so excited to have passenger rail both to Montreal, which is going to be a tremendous amount of help for the economy, and from Burlington to New York City in 6 hours or 6.5 hours. I think it's going to be very, very successful, but it's been many, many years coming. We're right down to the final stages, and I can't wait to see that happen, because if folks will have an alternative transportation to New York City, and I think it'll be very successful. As we know, we have to subsidize Amtrak, and the more ridership, the better it is. But I just had to add that because it's such an important thing, I think, and we're that close now. Many of us were talking about 10-year span and 12 years, and now it's down to a year or two. both of these projects, I think, are going to be a tremendous asset to the state of Vermont. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, Joe. Go ahead.
No, I could have one comment about this, and that what we're finding with so many of these, whether we're talking about using the rail trail or whether we're talking about accessing rail transportation, and that has to do with parking. And the extent to which we're accommodating places to park that are accessible or affordable to to the rail service. And I know that that's part of the planning, but I'm just, if you could speak to that, for example, in Burlington, how do you see people accessing the service and addressing the parking? Because I see that all along as it relates to we want more people to commute or carpool, and it's obviously it's great to see our park and rides heavily utilized, but in some cases they actually are oversubscribed. And I see that along public transit where they have pickup places, but where people park
Right.
is a real challenge. So if you could speak to that as well as we're looking at this expanded use of rail, passenger rail.
No, that's a great point, Senator Kitchell. And clearly in Burlington, it's not as predominant as it is in some places. I mean, we have our own parking in St. Albans. We have parking in Montpelier. We have a lot of parking in Virgins. There's some limited, well, there's actually a fairly decent amount of parking. We share the parking lot with the courthouse in White River Junction. There's parking, the Rutland situation is a bit unique in the way you board the train there, but there's certainly ample parking. Clearly Burlington is a little bit of a different situation, and that hasn't all been sorted out yet. I think a lot of people from the Chittenden County area, though, have the ability to connect by bus or to, Uber or taxi if they're planning to take a trip, and that way they don't have to deal with their car in the first place. I think you've got a higher number of people who live in that area who may not necessarily use a car every day, and that's their typical way of movement around the city. So, but you make a great point, and it's something we need to continue to be aware of. And I don't know if Michelle has any more granularity on the Burlington situation per se.
Yes, thank you, Secretary Flynn. In Burlington, there's actually a very substantial public parking garage that is located adjacent to and kind of behind the station building. So it's a very direct walking linkage to the facility. So we believe there's ample public parking available at that location to accommodate the users of the facility. I think you make a great point, Senator Kitchell, whether it's our rail trails, our bus facilities, et cetera. We do need to continue to look at how we plan for parking and access, and that is always a part of our efforts when we're looking at expanded, whether it's public transit service like we did up the Route 15 corridor into Jeffersonville. We needed to make sure that people had a place to park. So good point.
Yeah, very good. Some other significant accomplishments just to point you toward is the rail bridge load ratings. It's obviously critical we understand the weight ratings of our bridges, both at the highway level and the rail level. And currently of the 172 that we own in Vermont, we've got 86% of those up to the capacity to carry the national standard of 286,000 pounds. And this is a result of deliberate improvements, deliberate projects to get these bridges over time up. We still have a bit of a ways to go, but why this is important is that way shippers don't need to short fill cars, and they can maximize their ability to carry whatever it is they're moving, whether, for example, if you're Omea in Florence, The ability to put the entire appropriate load on a car is much more economical for them than it is to short fill a car because of a bridge that, for example, won't carry that weight. We benefited from what's called a build grant. This is a federal grant which is allowing us to upgrade 31 bridges from Rutland City south to Bennington and west into Hoosick, New York. We actually own line going into the state of New York, and it'll cover 31 bridges, and it will get those bridges all to the 286,000 pound standard as well. And this is intended to show the Amtrak ridership, very much like the public transit page that I showed you. You can clearly see the impacts of COVID-19. And obviously in the case of Amtrak, you know, we chose to suspend the service in March of 2020 for really risk-based safety reasons. And, you know, that remains our posture today at this point. You know, and clearly as soon as we feel that indications are that we can introduce travelers to Vermont by way of that mode of transportation, you know, we'll take that appropriate action. Not that this was our motivator, but, you know, we have realized some savings in the way Amtrak bills us for service as a result of the suspension, but that isn't why we did it. And I would also just take this moment to point out, because we hear many things, whether it's at the press conferences or questions, or just, I think people in general perhaps ask each other, well, why have they stopped Amtrak, but they haven't stopped the buses? And that's not a completely thorough story, because we have. There are, I believe, 7 Greyhound routes in Vermont that we subsidize totally, and there are 1 or 2 routes run by Premier Coach that we subsidize totally. We suspended those at the same time we suspended Amtrak. So we are consistent across the modes. Where we can control inbound traffic, we have done so, but we don't control commercial air traffic. And I think there are 3 corporate, that may not be the best word, but there are 3 Greyhound routes that we do not participate in. So those 3 in southern Vermont, I think one goes up into the White River, Hanover area. So we don't fund or subsidize those. So that's why those buses are in Vermont. But where we control through appropriations and subsidies, we've been consistent. And the reason is, you know, those travelers would be subject to quarantine, and not knowing, you know, how effectively those regulations are followed. We just felt from a risk analysis, public safety, as you hear the governor every day rightfully say, is number 1, public safety, public health. And so we want to restart Amtrak as quickly as our Amtrak supporters want us to. I think it's fair to say that perhaps not to a person, but I think the general consensus of the Rail Advisory Council understands our move on Amtrak. And, you know, but I also publicly say that we are committed to Amtrak. Amtrak is our passenger rail provider, and we look to restarting Amtrak as quickly and as soon as we see it able to be done. And our actions also, it's important for me to say on the record that this in no way reflects how we feel Amtrak operates their trains. We believe that even in a COVID environment, they've taken every safety measure they can with respect to distancing in the trains. They've closed down their cafe cars, cleaning. So none of this reflects any doubts that we have on Amtrak. Amtrak is a very good provider. It's simply a risk, as I guess I would quantify that. So the next slide talks a bit about Wayne Gamel's shop, Finance and Administration. It really covers the business office and the financial office. You know, I think most of you, or certainly those of you who have been on the committee before, know Lenny, and then Lori Valburn in our civil rights and labor compliance, Jana from performance and strategic initiatives, facilities management that also falls in this area. While BGS manages most all of Vermont state buildings of state government, AOT actually owns many of its own buildings, and so we manage our own buildings. We do appreciate the relationship with BGS in places, for example, like National Life, where we have leases, or Berry City Place. They did a tremendous job for us with DEW Construction, fabricating a good lease for us there. And so anyhow, but facilities is a big deal. It's a very large footprint. Contract administration, these are the people that do a myriad of things, in part what I talked about earlier about, accelerating our project delivery, getting contracts out the door more quickly. That's really the last place a contract would go before it actually gets out on the street. And so that's what contract admin does. Organizational development, that's our training center. That's the VTTC. You'll hear more about that, but we are very big on personal development, on training our own workforce. We work hand in hand with CAPS, which is the state enterprise training platform as well. And then we have our audit office. And speaking of the VTTC, this just gives you a snapshot of the degree of involvement and the pace of involvement in a year. The numbers that you see at the top of the page all occurred through the middle part of March. Those were all in-person trainings that were affected. And then we've shifted everything to online. I mean, online has a whole series of benefits in many, many ways, as we all have learned. But we've been very effective at moving our training online. There's certain things, of course, that are much easier to be done in person. If it's hands-on training, we do a lot of training with our, for example, teaching, new workers in our garages how to properly and safely put tire chains on trucks and how to use chainsaws and weld. And so that's a little more difficult to do virtually, but we're adapting, as is everybody. And there'll be more testimony on training and on the VTTC in the days to come. One thing I point out at the bottom of this, oh, I'm sorry, it's the next slide. I'm ahead of myself on my notes. Civil rights. Civil rights might be curious for some to understand why we would have a civil rights shop. I think we're probably one of the few agencies in state government that has its own civil rights office, frankly. In large part, this is because we must assure compliance to the federal government that federal regulations regarding the Civil Rights Act and other laws like the Davis-Bacon Wage Act are being followed. And we have to ensure that they're being followed even by private sector industry partners. So if we have a contract with contractor X to do a job for us, it's our responsibility to assure that that contractor as a private business is following the rules because they're using federal money. So this is a very, very involved process. And they do a tremendous job with training and recruitment. They are connected to the technical centers. They're connected to places like VTC. We promote skills competition, whether it's, popsicle stick bridge building. We promote, just you'll have more testimony on this, but it is a very vibrant organization within the agency. They also work very closely with the disadvantaged business enterprise and women-owned businesses and promote that as well. So a very busy place. They also ensure that all of our employees take the mandatory, civility, sexual harassment training across the agency. So a lot going on in this space and more testimony to come on that. Procurement and contracting, we've successfully transitioned this really to a virtual world. So while we've, as everybody, right, people would head into their offices in droves every day. These can be complicated legal contracts, a lot of nuance to what occurs. And this has been completely successfully, I believe, is accurate into the virtual world, 100%. And Wayne's Gamel's folks will talk more about that. But we've also worked to create dashboards that make accessing information more easy for contractors. And I really like to reinforce the fact that we look at contractors, we look at the members of AGC and the Paving Association and Vermont Truck and Bus and others. We look at them as our partners because without them, we can't, deliver the type of projects that Vermont needs and the type of projects that you help support through our budgets and our programs. Continuous improvement I've talked about. This shows you some of the things that we've done in 2020 and looking to do in 2021. It really focusing on the way that we reduce errors, the way that we look for new tools, the way that we train ourselves, the way that we provide opportunities for our employees. Again, I talked about dashboard tools. It seems to me that that's, if you're familiar with the fact book, and I don't know if you've received it electronically yet, you will receive copies of it as well. The way that that book looks is the way that we've deliberately been moving to sort of tell stories, sort of like the screenshot I showed you earlier about winter maintenance, a little, more in the visual learning realm, if you will. Moving on to the Department of Motor Vehicles, the commissioner and her team will be testifying more, but it is basically broken up into 4 groups: support services, operations, enforcement, and special programs. For those of you that may not know, since we last spoke in person, I realize there was some testimony on budget, of course, through the summer, but Colonel Oliverda, whom I'm sure the committee members that have been here are familiar with, he retired this year. We were fortunate to be able to hire Tony Fakos when he retired as Montpelier City Police Chief. So he leads the enforcement division that Jake used to leave, and so you'll meet Tony, you'll all meet Tony in that respect when he and Terry Blaisdell and Mike Smith and Mike Touchette come in with Wanda for further testimony. Some high-level successes in motor vehicles this year. Awful lot going on. We'll talk a bit about how they've responded to COVID, but even before COVID, there was quite a lot going on at motor vehicles, and it's not always understood, seen, or perhaps appreciated, because we only hear from people who, rightfully have waited too long to get something back in the mail, or something hasn't gone as smoothly as they might have wished. But there's been an awful lot of work going on at motor vehicles to improve things, moving a lot of things to online, even before we had to, before COVID. Probably one of the bigger things is the top bullet, the Vermont CVO. This was moving to an online system that captures all of our international registration information and fuel tax information. For the newer members, the IFTA, or the fuel tax information, is the way that the commercial trucking companies pay as they go in an apportioned way based on the miles they drive in our state, whether they buy fuel here or not. And it's a complex nationwide clearinghouse that allocates funds to various states based on logs that trucking companies, keep. It is a very, very large revenue stream for us, critical revenue stream for us. This was a very delicate system. It's been converted online in a much more robust and secure fashion today. So there'll be a lot of testimony on that. As well as CView, which is an exchange to centralize a dashboard used by our commercial vehicle enforcement people. So the people that you see in the black pickup trucks that are weighing commercial vehicles around the state of Vermont, it's improved the way that they can access information on the road. It's further secures the information of the company, of the driver, to be sure that we've got the right information, which really protects the company and the driver as much as it does getting us the right information. And this has gone to a new type of system, and it's been a big accomplishment. As well as, I think one of the most really exciting things, and something that DMV should be proud it's accomplished, is we're now doing exams, not CDLs yet, but everything else, permits and exams in 10 languages. They've made a concerted effort to be able to communicate with Vermonters, at least in the 10 major languages that are spoken in the state of Vermont. It's a big accomplishment. And this also includes having translators now in a car. So if English is not your first language, and you want to get a driver's license, you should have a right to that road test and all the materials that support the exam. So you do have the materials now that are translated, and you also can have an interpreter in the car with you, along with the motor vehicle examiner, to take you out and do a road test. And that's really never occurred before in Vermont. So, it's probably a new concept in most states, frankly. And so they've moved to that space now, and it's a very big accomplishment. They should be proud of that. We all should be. And we'll talk about COVID-19 across the agency. DMV certainly played a big part of that in their response. A Other issues, though, was the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System. This was a federal regulation that tightens up information regarding titles and titling of vehicles, especially out-of-state vehicles, and how that information is shared and transmitted. And then e-permitting. We are close to being able to permit or issue those permits in an electronic fashion. I spoke about that a little bit earlier in the presentation. These are the permits that are issued by the state of Vermont. I want to point out that this does not yet resolve the issue regarding municipal permits, and you probably will continue to hear from trucking industry and contractors, crane operators, that that's a concern to them because many municipalities require a local permit. We are an open door to municipalities that want to join into this electronic format. We just don't control the narrative in that space, or we can't dictate that a local community do something in one way unless there was legislation supporting that. And that's not saying we advocate for anything in that regard. It's just the fact that we're creating the permitting system for the permits that are issued by us. And it will have the ability to adapt and expand as municipalities may wish to come on. And so now talking a bit about the entire agency's role in the COVID response. As we said earlier, the state of emergency was declared on Friday, the 13th of March. And we immediately started to move into a posture of, at a high level, understanding the people that are on this call with me and a few others in many meetings, understanding, what are the most immediate concerns we have. Obviously, it wasn't long before we moved to the stay home, stay safe order, which means that Vermont state offices that were going to close down, and that work would move remotely, as we did. And over a very brief period of time, we moved, in the range of 450 people to remote working. And we did so within days, frankly, which is about everybody who could, right? Many jobs can't. Obviously, our garages and our maintenance workers can't do that work remotely. When DMV shut down, those workers didn't go home. Those workers, reported to work every day. They just weren't open to the public, but they processed mail every day. They processed email every day. They processed telephone calls every day. But obviously our administrative staff, a lot of the technical people, engineering and science work, that was able to relocate. And we did that. We operated under the incident command system, as I said earlier, and we still are today. We already, prior to the pandemic, had established a fairly intricate way to assess our staffing capabilities and what are the essential functions of the agency, and at what point do we reach a critical point if we have absenteeism. And we had done that work before the pandemic hit. We wanted to know at which point do all the functions, the major functions of the agency, move from, say, green to yellow or to red. And that obviously has impacts on what we do, and it's all part of the continuity of operations plan. We get a daily report every day, 7 days a week, from the health department. If any person either tests positive for COVID or is involved as a close contact, through contact tracing. And, so we adapt to that. So we have real-time information as to our current status as a result of the pandemic. And we, previous to that as well, also though had accountability trackers. So we would know how many people were available for work. It's real now, of course, with the pandemic. Some of the different things that the agency, quietly has been doing every day behind the scenes. It has been the primary method of distributing PPE across Vermont since the beginning of the pandemic. We have vehicles that assemble every day. There are deliveries, at the warehouse, and they disperse across the state of Vermont, delivering these critical supplies to healthcare facilities and hospitals around Vermont. I believe even there was one delivery made to the Albany Medical Center for some PPE that Vermont had and New York didn't have and needed desperately at that time. We have, obviously, many of you are aware of the work we did at the borders in the beginning. That was to establish an understanding of from where vehicles were coming. For the record, we were not taking down license plate numbers, never did. We were simply noting states of origin. And it was interesting to see, if you think back to that point, you know, the Northeast and in much of the east of part of the United States wasn't yet expressing, you know, significant impacts from the virus, but there were hot spots in Illinois, there were hot spots in Louisiana, and others that I don't recall. But I remember one Sunday, because I traveled around the state 2 different times on about a 700-mile route over the weekends to visit with all these border folks that were stationed out counting cars. And it was interesting the number of Louisiana cars we were seeing even at our northern border. And we don't believe that they were rental cars, because rental cars in Quebec wouldn't have American license plates on them. So, you know, some people have said, so what did you do with the information? And really, it's data. It's there. It's a tremendous body of data now, though. We've moved away from the in-person staffing of that as we began to build out systems. And some of this goes back to the intelligent transportation systems that you mentioned interest in, Senator Chittenden. But we have established, you know, some automated systems now at some of the major, I believe, 5 ports into the state of Vermont that account for the majority of all in and outbound traffic. And we can talk to those devices at a daily basis, and they tell us numbers. They no longer tell us origins by license plate, you know, assignment, but it's a very robust system. And then before winter, we were also using the rubber tube counters that you've all seen along the highway in different places. So, you know, that was a big effort. We also played a big role, along with the Vermont National Guard, clearly was the lead role on the food distribution, but AOT was involved at several of our state airports as the sites for that food distribution. We also did traffic control for that. AOT workers worked alongside with National Guard to build surge facilities, like the one, for example, in Essex. There was one built in Rutland at the hockey rink. So our workers were also involved in that effort. We've been involved in making Vermont ready for receiving vaccine. We put staff into the Department of Labor to help with the influx of unemployment insurance claims. We put staff into ACCD to help administer grants, because all the grants that came from the $1.25 billion in the initial COVID relief bill, most of those grants were issued out through ACCD. Some were issued out through the Ag Department, of course. But we also had an individual that worked with Capstone in Barrie and help them establish incident command and help them run. That organization is run by Sue Minter now, and Sue knew firsthand from her experience in Irene and having been the secretary of AOT's ICS capabilities, and asked for some help. And we dedicated a person to that effort, because Capstone, along with many, many other organizations, you know, serve such a critical need. And so we did that. And, you know, this is just something we were doing because we're fortunate to have such bench depth at the agency. We're fortunate to have, you know, people that have so many skill sets across the enterprise. And at our peak, at least, let's hope the peak is in our past, even though COVID cases continue to increase today. But as far as effort peak, we had 213 people, and their job daily was a COVID-related matter, not what it was they were originally hired to do. But we continued, we functioned, you know, the wheels didn't come off the bus, and that's a testament to everybody. And as of yesterday, we still had 61 people who are devoted on a daily basis to the COVID response effort. So like all of state government, like all of Vermont businesses, like all of Vermonters, we've all pulled together, you know, to meet this challenge. And I'm very proud of this agency for its share of that. And this just speaks to what I said. We've also got contact tracers. I omitted that, but we have people that are doing contact tracing, and we have people that will be involved in the mass vaccinations once we move into the different age banding, as the governor and Dr. Levine have talked about, and where those vaccines will be rolled out. AOT staff will be part of the cadre of workers there to meet Vermonters and help to facilitate that process of vaccinating people. We won't be doing the vaccinations, but my point is we'll be handling some of the logistics along with other partners. And of course, as is in any activation of the State Emergency Operations Center, we have staff in that facility virtually 24 hours a day, as do all the other state government entities. And that really ends the formal slides of the presentation. I appreciate you listening to all that. I know sometimes that PowerPoints can be arduous to watch and listen to, but we're very anxious,
Is there
Mr.
any
Chair, for any
questions
questions that you might have.
Any questions before we move on to DMV? Yes, Senator Chittenden.
So not so much a question, but something I would love to know at some point, Secretary Flynn, what your thoughts are. Something that came up in my role in the Green Mountain Transit Board, and it's something our neighbors, New Hampshire, has done. As you likely know, public transportation is funded in a variety of different ways. And one thing that we do is collect local municipal monies. The city of South Burlington is part of Green Mountain Transit, and the taxpayers of South Burlington pay about $500,000 a year, $26 per citizen, not even just property owners, to fund public transportation. But that public transportation extends beyond the boundaries of South Burlington. It serves the greater region. One thing that a notion that has surfaced multiple times, and again, I want to preface it by saying I'm not saying we need to do this, but I'd be curious at some point to hear your thoughts about a rational assessment method of using car registration fees. And maybe this segues into DMV, but if you live in a community and choose to register a single occupancy vehicle, to assess a public transportation $5, $10 additional fund in order to support and decongest our roadways. It's a notion that I think is worth at least exploring or benchmarking against other states. I'm not sure if you have a reaction to that now, or if you have readings that you might direct me to understand the feasibility or not of such a notion.
With respect to readings or any publications on that topic, I don't, but I don't know if Michelle or Ross McDonald have anything like that they're aware of. I would suggest to you that it's a great question, and I think it also falls into the realm of how do we fairly assess electric vehicles, that currently, by not paying any gas tax because they don't use gasoline, we haven't, so there's many elements to a question of equity and fairness, right? And you make a good point. I would say that we don't have the capacity, in my opinion, right now within the registration revenues that we receive to carve out, other places for that revenue to go necessarily. And clearly, I'm not on record of advocating for any increased fees or taxes, but there are always multiple ways to arrive at a successful conclusion. And I think the door is open for that discussion clearly. And in learning, you mentioned New Hampshire. Personally, I'm not aware of how they do that. Ross maybe, but certainly learning best practices about the way other states do things we learn from that all the time. So I don't know, Michelle, if you have any more on that. And right at the moment, I'm going to try to stop sharing this successfully without losing everybody. Let's see if I can navigate that. How about that?
Yes, Secretary Flynn and Senator Chittenden, I am aware of the framework that's used in the New Hampshire model. And as the Secretary mentioned, there are a lot of issues to be grappled with as it relates to revenue collection for use of the existing system, as well as funding our various means of transportation that are not single occupancy vehicle related. So I think that's something we can continue to talk about as the session moves on in terms of what we need to look at.
I'd like to make
Yes.
a comment
Senator
about
Kittle.
public transit, and just to bring the committee up to date. In the budget, we had language about having joint fiscal approve the Medicaid transportation contract. One thing about Vermont, and I think it might be unique, Michelle, and that is the extent to which we have, it didn't exist at the time we did it, but we braid the federal E&D, which is elderly and disabled funding for public transit, with our Medicaid, with our public transit network, with Medicaid transportation. There's a federal requirement that certain Medicaid beneficiaries are assured access to their healthcare services. And for many years, since the mid 80s, Medicaid has used the public transit system, and that has resulted in about $14 million flowing into that infrastructure. And we were very concerned that one, if Medicaid made a determination to move that contract to an out-of-state vendor, that it would have very significant fiscal impacts to our public transit infrastructure. And so in the end, at our last joint fiscal committee meeting, the Department of Vermont Health Access indicated that they had reviewed the proposals. I believe there were two, and they were going to continue the contract with the public transit, Vermont Public Transit Association. And for all the reasons that we felt, if it didn't flow that way, it would create a tremendous loss of revenue to our public transit system. So I just wanted you to know that that current arrangement with Medicaid will remain in effect, and the Joint Fiscal Committee approved that contract proposal at our last meeting. But there is a very significant flow of money, and it was designed very specifically to help provide resources to support our public transit structure. And that's, as I say, that has been in place. Well, I hate to date myself because I was part of doing it, but it was probably about 1985. And don't make any comments. Andy, I know you're, huh?
No.
I know you're tempted.
We know better.
Yeah.
Yeah, the senior senator, as I'm always referred to.
Yes. Following the senior senator from Caledonia, I had just a quick question. Or because of AOT's successful use of asset management, I found out recently, well, a little bit ago, that BGS is doing the same thing. I think they're a little behind you, and I just wanted to make sure you guys are working with them so they have the same success that you have had.
We are, Senator Perchlik, and thanks for bringing that up. We're actually working with ANR as well. So this started out as something called TAMIS, Transportation Asset Management Information System, and it migrated into VAMIS. Yeah, it is, right? It migrated into VAMIS, which was Vermont Asset Management Information System. So when we started talking about this and frankly, it was organic at BGS because Secretary Cole became the commissioner of BGS. He was fully aware of what was underway. And when now Commissioner Fitch went to BGS, she had come from AOT, so she was aware. And we worked hand in glove with them to develop this. And we've also worked very closely and still work closely daily with the Agency of Natural Resources. So they're also using this tool as well. And it's open to anybody who wants it.
Thank you.
Yes, Jane.
I have another question. And that has to do with the fact that we have another slug of federal money coming to the state in the second bill that was passed. Unlike the first, where we had most of all of that coming through state government, about half does not. But there's a section on transportation, and I wondered if you could just brief us in terms of how that is affecting the plan, the transportation plan that you'll be presenting to us. And I know that there are formula grants. Some might have matched, some may not. The other question is the extent to which there's flexibility to use those funds, so T funds can help continue to advance transportation goals to reduce emissions or to support public transit. There's quite a bit for public transit. So I wondered if you could just speak to us about where the agency is relative to the transportation related components of that bill.
Certainly, Senator. Of course, as you know, the budget is still being developed, so the finality of that will be released by the governor. But you know, it's fair to ask that question, and it's tremendously beneficial to us. There's no question about it. The federal money, though, was designed deliberately to go through existing grant programs to protect how it's used at the local level. Just a little bit north of $50 million will be coming through the Federal Highway Administration, and this is 100% money. So it will free up state funds that we intend to put back into the transportation picture, into the transportation program, and in how we look to, create that architecture. Of course, we'll announce when the governor announces that. Also, I think initially to us, the transit piece was really a bit of a surprise. We had heard about the Federal Highway Administration money a few days before we heard about the Federal Transit Administration money, but it too is directed strictly through that pipeline. And, it'll go to operators, and it's designed to help them cover operations. Whereas the initial money in the first COVID bill was really intended to create the ability to provide PPE and to protect how they ran their organizations. This is designed to help them with operational costs of running their organizations. However, it too frees up some state funds, and that'll all be baked into the as recommended 22 budget. But it was a tremendous and welcome surprise. It puts us in a much better place than we thought we'd be, and it might be a great opportunity just to especially for the new members, sort of help frame where we've come from since March. And clearly the other members know this because you worked that 21 budget right through until September. But around the 1st of April, we were still in fiscal 20. And all of a sudden, we were receiving revised revenue forecasts as a result of looking ahead to what we think the pandemic might do to us. And we were facing, in the last 3 months of fiscal 20, we were facing a $40 million hole. And we were able to come out of fiscal 20, balanced, as we should, and we did. And then we immediately were facing a $42 million revenue hole for fiscal 21. So working, with the committees here and others in the legislature, we came through it as well. A lot of one-time money sources that we could find, just doing several things, slowing up some projects by design, if you will, to allow us to be able to meet that reduced capacity. And then working with the legislature, once the 21 budget was passed in September of 20, we immediately faced the forecast of what looked like about a $32.5 million hole for fiscal 22. So we've really been in, and you know this too, because you've lived it and you've worked these same problems across the enterprise of government, but we've been in budget development almost, for over a year sustained.
Oh, it's been never ending. This is a session
has.
that never ended.
Yep.
So you're right. We had two budget adjustments, two major CRF bills, a municipal assistance bill, hazard pay bill. It's been, I can appreciate what you've been going through. One comment I'll just throw back, and I can't remember where it was made, and by a colleague, around the extent to which there might be a little, some money to provide some one-time assistance. And I think you proposed doing that to municipalities and towns. So I just throw that out. Senator Mauser, do you remember where that comment came from? But anyway, it was something that was raised by someone in the Senate around the extent to which this would provide any additional assistance to that local level. Was that you, Andy?
No, but I do remember it. I can't remember who it was that brought that up.
Yeah.
Well, as you, I'm sorry, Senator English.
No, go ahead.
Please.
No, please go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to acknowledge your point, Senator Kitchell. Working together with you, the legislature, we did do that in the 21 budget, and certainly we're aware, of the need, and the budget will be delivered by the governor, but we're very aware of the need. You're absolutely right.
Okay.
Yes, Senator Ingalls.
As we know, the pandemic has caused a lot of frustrations amongst everything. And I think one of the largest frustrations in this department was the closing of the offices and people's delays of receiving what they needed to receive. But I'm thankful that you folks recognize that and got everything up and running. And we don't seem to hear the comments that we've heard before about delays as far as people receiving what they needed. And so I thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. Like everybody, the people at DMV, as I said, they really never stopped working. We just stopped the public input, and of course that's been restored now in a great fashion with this appointment scheduling, and it's a program that I hope we keep. I think we're intending to try to do that even beyond the pandemic, because it's very convenient for Vermonters, and it's very convenient for DMV because they have predictability as to what the volume will be on a given day, along with other things that I hope we keep as well. The ability to, print your license plate out before you go pick up a car, whether it's a private transaction or from a dealer. You can print it at home and print your registration. And that does not relieve DMV from any of its work on the back end, but what it does do is it immediately gives you your documents and you don't have to wait for those. So innovation, the pandemic, as is in everything, right? Necessity forces innovation, and much of the innovation that's occurred at DMV, I think, is innovation that we're going to embrace, going on. And they've done a tremendous job of whittling away at the backlog of numbers. Again, they report that weekly. And that's not to say that there's still not work to be done. There's certainly areas where, people rightfully, get frustrated. And Wanda can chime in, but I think I remember she said yesterday that the backlog immediately after everything was shut down was upwards of 20,000. I mean, that's just a staggering number if you think about it. And today, while I don't have the exact number at the tip of my tongue, but I can tell you it's down in the 4-digit number, and it's, I think, probably under 2,500 or so. So it really is a lot of work, but it's sort of like my comment about roads. We can say it's great that we've got 64% of our roads that are, fair or good, but if you live near a road that's very poor, then that's 100% of your experience. So because we've been able to move from a 20,000 pieces of mail backlog down to 2,500, that's really a lot of effort, and they should be recognized for that. But if your documents are in the 2,500 that are still backed up, we understand why, people get frustrated, but a lot of people are working hard to move this in the right direction.
Senator Mazza, can I?
Yes, go ahead, Senator Berkeley.
So are you saying, Secretary Flynn, that we'll just have to wait for the budget announcement to get a rundown of all the federal money? Because it's how you decided to work that? Because I thought we'd get a briefing on just on different, because I thought there was stuff in there about airports and other details.
Well, we really consider that part of the budget build, Senator. I mean, we're very transparent about it's like $50.4 million through federal highway and the $26 million for transit. And maybe Michelle knows if there's an FAA component there, but how we look to spend that money in the transportation program is really part of developing the budget. And I can tell you that there are meetings occurring today. I mean, this is a very fluid situation. We like everybody else, had submitted our 22 as recommended budget on November 18th, which the administration asked us for. And here we are on the 13th of January, yet again revising it. And so, I think it's correct to say we're certainly aware of all the, or at least most of the wishes and desires on how transportation funds are spent. But yet, to answer your question directly would, indicate how that budget is being developed. And it's premature for me to be able to do that. And I don't mean to try to avoid your question.
No, my question is when we would hear it, and that's fine to hear it when the budget is out. But yeah, I just, maybe even the bucket. So there's only the federal highway in the transportation.
So Senator Perchlik and Secretary Flynn, perhaps I could respond.
Please.
So there is a Federal Aviation Administration bucket as well. It's a small bucket of 3 million or so. We're still not clear as to how much of that will come to the state airports versus Burlington Airport. So we're waiting to see that. Yesterday, the new Joint Fiscal Office liaison staff person to transportation, Chris Rupie, gave a very nice overview presentation on agency funds, including the CARES Act coronavirus funds, both the recent ones and the prior ones, to the House Transportation Committee. And it was a very nice PowerPoint that I viewed. And so you might inquire of him to get the exact details. He took the chart that the Joint Fiscal Committee had looked at that had been provided by Steve Klein. So that detail is available.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, that was excellent, Joe, like always, and good overview, and there are other details when people want to ask about them. What is our next step now, Joe?
Well, that was the sort of the comprehensive overview, Senator, of the agency, both DMV and the VTrans side. I don't, there's no formal DMV presentation, but certainly if Commissioner Manoli has anything she'd like to add to what we've already said, but I know that they're scheduled to come in, or will be scheduled to come in, to give you a more in-depth view of the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Where do we stand presently as of today? I don't know if anybody has that, where we stand on maintenance a year ago to today. Was the weather made a difference or not made a difference, or?
It has, and if you give me a second, I can give you that answer. Just give me a second. Yeah.
I mean, are we within budget, Dick, or saving money?
Well,
we are
curious to see if, because I know salt use was down last year, and we'll see where we are. But it could change naturally. The winter is young, but just curious.
Yeah, no, we, again, I'm sort of on test here to see how I can adapt to my devices to give you that answer quickly. Just bear with me.
No problem.
Somebody want to play elevator music for a second or something?
Secretary Flynn, I took you off co-host. So are you going to try to share something again? Because I will put you back on.
No, thank you, Liz. I was just going to speak to the question as soon as I find it.
Okay, I'll get back on mute.
Thank you. All righty.
And as far as the agenda today, even though everybody else was listed, they were just listed because they were here to answer questions, but it really was just a presentation from you, Secretary Flynn. That's
I have that data if you'd like me to share it.
Oh, please, Wayne. I was just about to find it, but yeah, thank you very much.
I'll just bring that up on my other screen. Hang on just a sec.
Wayne, can you just say yourself for the record?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Wayne Simmons, Chief Engineer for the Highway Division. So let me zoom up a little bit here. So we definitely are trending lower than both last year and our 5-year average. At the end of week 9, which was a little more than a week and a half ago, because we lag a week behind in the data that we report. Our FY21 usage was right around 30,000 tons of salt. The 5-year average is around between 45 and 50,000 tons. So we're probably about 60% of the 5-year average right now. And last year at this time, we had used just about 55,000 tons of salt, and sand is well below the 5-year average, and our liquid salt usage is right around the same reduction as our granular salt. So last year, early in the season, actually the last couple of years early in the season, we've had a number of ice storms. And ice storms are very salt intensive events, because basically you just drive around in circles putting salt down because the rain washes the salt off and you can never build up a residual. So even though we've had a number of days where we just kind of have that drizzle snow, it's much better to deal with than the ice events. So this is all sort of knock on wood, because
that's all right. We'll there's a lot of
other big months coming up.
No, just curious. Okay, thank you. Any other questions this morning? You've had a good full agenda of all the issues and done very well by the agency. We have thanked them a lot, and we'll have more in the coming months naturally. But at this point, is there anything else that anyone has any issues about or questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we should have Chris come in, since he seems to have, at least for a short presentation, so that we have the same information that the House Committee was just provided.
Sure.
Okay, I don't know how much time it needs to take in between other testimony that's been scheduled, but might be a good fiscal framework for us to have.
Have Chris Roop come in?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want me to get him now?
No. I mean, on the schedule.
It's fine. Yep.
Yeah. No, I'm hoping that we could have a few minutes before my next meeting at noon.
So what's our agenda for tomorrow, Joe?
I don't have that, Senator,
I
in
have
front of
it.
me. Okay.
I have it in front of me. It's
Okay.
it starts at 9 with strategic, and stop me if I'm saying too much. Strategic plan agency performance monitoring and results-based accountability with Joe Segal and Jana Guilford. Then Highway Division overview with Wayne Simmons and Ann Gamel. Asset Management Bureau overview, Ken Marcia. Project Delivery Bureau overview, Rob White. Construction and Materials Bureau, Nick Vandenberg. Operations and Safety Bureau, Josh Schultz. Maintenance Bureau, Todd Law. Central Garage, Tammy Ellis.
Good. That seems like a full morning. So anything else? Anyone has any issues? Otherwise, we'll call it a morning. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much,
It's
everybody. You did a great
Thank
Good
job.
to
you.
see everybody.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
All right.
Very informative.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.